Hey everybody, and welcome to the Fill the Frame video. So, Fill the Frame was a subject that you guys had a little bit of a challenge with. This was the one that had the fewest submissions. So I'm going to show you here four photos, right off the bat, of images that came to my mind. These are ones I took when I think of Fill the Frame. This Jeep photo, I think you've seen on this channel before, and this one, even though there's negative space around the Jeep, it really dominates that frame. This next one here is of a borzoi, and again, this dog's face fills up the entire frame. One of the things these two shots have in common is the subject is very clear, and I think you'll see that in the next two shots I'll show you as well. Here's a shot of a buffalo. Very tight crop on the buffalo's face. And lastly, here's a shot of a kid who came up to me on a hike. Very, very sweet kid, really wanted her photo taken. So I had my Yashica 45 on my Sony a7S II, and she was like 4 inches from the front of the lens. So had a couple shots that turned out, and that also pretty well fills the frame. So these were the things that I had in mind going into judging these photos, and so I was really looking forward to things that took this and in this case I was looking for things that did something similar, of filling the frame up with a clear single subject. So this first photo we'll look at is some blossoms, looks like magnolia blossoms in fall when they are past their prime. And so the image fills the frame up with the blossoms, but there's not one single blossom. So it's a different take on the prompt than I had in mind. Nothing wrong with that, just a different take. This next shot here was one I struggled with a bunch because there's some things really going right here, and then there's some weaknesses that would be room for improvement. Okay, so what's really going right here is the use of tone and the use of black and white. This image would not have worked in color. It works really well in black and white. Some of the things that could have been done here. So let me point out one thing here specifically that works really well in black and white: the leaded glass. So if you had color in the leaded glass, I don't think the leading in it, the artistry in the lead work would not stand out as well as it does with a black and white image. Because with the black and white, you can see little tonal variations in the glass, indicating that there are different colors, but they're not significant, so that really emphasizes the lead work in the window panes. And so that really right there is the crux of this image, is the lead work. And so one of the struggles I had with this is in the bottom left, where the lead work gets cut off a little bit. And also where some of the glare from some of the shadow blocks out a little bit of the lead work more than in the sun. So reframing this image a little bit to be straight on, and also taking the photo at a time when the sun was at the photographer's back would have changed the nature of the photo, yes, but also would have corrected a couple of the technical issues that take away from the image's presentation. So some of the things that are working here really, really work well and really deserve to be amplified when photos like this are taken in the future. Here's another similar shot of architecture. And architecture is hard to do with filling the frame because you can get a part of a building and you can fill the frame with it, but it has to be a really dominant architectural feature. Having just the whole building fill the frame makes the prompt it's a challenge to fill the prompt in that way because there are other things in the frame. People, the sidewalk, the windows. So the question becomes, is the building really filling the frame? Or are all of these different elements that are sub-parts of the image not filling the frame? So other than that, I think the harsh shadow, I think, is detracting a little bit from the shot. If this had been if I don't know exactly how this is lined up in the city, but if there were a time of day that this shot could be taken where that shadow line was along the base of the pillars, let's say, that would put the whole face of the building into the sun and then cast the sidewalk into shadows. And that could really emphasize the structure of the building, because then you would still be getting shadows from the pillars and the windows. So good placement for the photographer, maybe off by a few hours in terms of the time of day. So here's a shot of people in a parade. And as we will hear multiple times in this this video and in all the other videos, because this what I'm about to say applies to each of this image in the last two, is that the verticals are all crooked. And when the verticals are crooked, it feels like an accident. And there are cases where having your verticals be crooked could be argued that it contributes to the sense of the atmosphere. If you're trying to convey something like a party where people are celebrating and are drunk, then having crooked verticals is not against the rules. But as a general rule, having solid verticals will make the image more viewer-friendly. And ultimately, who you are making your images for is the viewer. Now, that said, if you look on the left side of the building, if you corrected that vertical, then the ones over on the right would be thrown off because the camera is being pointed up and you're getting a keystoning effect because of that. So this would be a hard image to do that with. So in this shot, I would maybe recompose the crop a little bit to try to hide what's going on with some of the verticals. And the other thing is the image here fills the frame with the parade or the celebration, whatever's going on, but it doesn't fill the frame with any single component. So that's a bit of that's an area in which this image isn't fulfilling the intent of the prompt perfectly. So, but otherwise, in terms of some of the other technical things, tonality and shadow retention and highlight retention and things like that, focus, all of those really good. Knowing when to take the picture, also pretty good. Having the camera up a little bit higher to get rid of some of those hats in the foreground might have might have benefited the image a little bit as well. But overall, there's a lot of things in this image that are working pretty well in terms of from a technical perspective. For this next one, this was a fairly vexing one for me, because when I started looking at the images, I looked at the thumbnails first, and I said, I'm going to grab if the image jumps off the screen as a thumbnail, it's going right into the top 5 folder for really detailed evaluation. And when I saw this image, I thought it was a photo of a kid over some model trains, which it is, but it's a photo of a painting. And then there's the Lionel train in the case in the foreground. And so the frame is absolutely filled with like 3 layers of image. There's the kid, and then there's the trains he's playing with, and then the trains in the foreground. And I think that structure works really well. So overall, in terms of the image, it's one that I like. I might have stepped a little bit to the left to take this to try to get the vertical on the left there a little bit more well aligned. But other than that, I like the depth that this image has. one of the reasons it didn't make the top 5 is that the real train, I'm going to argue, is the subject of the image, and it doesn't fill the frame. So another way to make this image, make that train fill the frame, is if you had a chance to take this photo again and you got up right next to the glass case that that train is in and had the engine dominate the frame, with the painting being, or the picture being a smaller part of the background, or a background, or the background, but it would be a smaller percentage of the overall frame, then that would have made this scene fit the prompt a little bit more closely. So this next image here of the trees is a double exposure. I'm going to guess that the double exposure was done in post, because there's some additional processing to the tree bark that looks like it was run through a couple of Photoshop filters. I think the overall composition and the use of color are both really solid and really interesting. The way that the tree's branches come together along the top, forming that arch, does a lot of good to keep the viewer's eyes in the photo. And then the lower branches that kind of point to each other coming off of those main trees on the outside, again, also help to keep pointing the viewer's eyes inward. So that works really well. And there's a lot going on in this image that I think is really good and that I really like. I think it's a very pleasing finished result, but the trees don't really fill the frame. So good shot, not necessarily in line with the prompt. And that was something that occurred over and over and over again with this category. So to that end, when I do my next contest, fill the frame will not be a category that I revisit. So this shot of the Rolls-Royce is really good at filling the frame. It fills the frame with the front of the car. And this was one that initially made it into the top 5 folder and is really good. And there's nothing wrong with the photo. I happen to like this very much, and I think it's a very good composition, very good use of light, and very good use of color. So really very pleasing photo of that car. Here's a shot that I liked a lot of the waterfront in Singapore here. And I think this is a really amusing shot because it looks like the kid's got water from the fountain splashing down on his head. Really clever composition. And I have no issues at all with clever photography. So one of the reasons that this is not in the top 5 is solely because of the distance from the subject. So because the photographer is so far from the subject, then there's so much of the other stuff going on. And that other stuff becomes a distraction to the central part of the image, which is the very funny structure of the kid with his head right in front of the splashing part of the fountain in the background. So if there were an opportunity to take this exact photo again, the photographer would want to be right between those two girls in the middle of the frame. Just shove them aside. I mean, don't push them to the ground, but just be like, excuse me, shove your camera in there and take the picture. Unless you don't know the people, then, I mean, don't do that because it would be rude. But that would be the vantage point so that you got the kid in larger in the frame. Because right now, like the guy in shorts on the right side and the family in left tending to the baby, they both take the viewer away from what is the central and very, very interesting and very, very fun part of this image. The next shot here of birch bark. Can't tell if it's birch bark or fallen trees with some leaves. Really enjoy the use of color and the contrast in the birch bark, the whites and the darks. Really good use of tonal range in that there aren't blown out highlights in there. Well, there are a couple, but they're not significant. And the shadow detail loss is also insignificant. Both the bright whites and the dark blacks do a lot to give depth to the image and really amplify the warm colors in the image. So really successful in that regard. And it does fill the frame with the tree bark. There are some, the overall image, the elements of it were a little bit more distracting, I'm going to argue, than the images that made the top 5. But that said, still a very, very pleasing image to look at. This next shot really did a good job of filling the frame with these buildings. And I like that there's that central gap between them that separates them. So it's not just the frame being filled with balconies. And this is one of the things that sets this shot apart from the other architectural shots in this category, is that there is that gap. So we know that that the frame is intentionally being filled with this repeating pattern. Okay, dog and onions. So firstly, don't let the dog eat the onions. That's not good for them. So secondly, I like the image composition, and I like that the photographer is low to the ground. So one thing when photographing, especially scenes like this, or scenes where you want to give a drama to the scene, well, you'll hear this again in upcoming videos for the contest here. Get low. Don't be afraid to ruin the knees on your pants. The pants aren't going to last you the rest of your life anyway. Sacrifice the knees if you need to get some really good images. Most of my photography pants have mud-stained knees. It's just part of being out and being a photographer. So the photographer did a good job here of getting the camera pretty low. Whether they physically knelt or just held the camera low, I couldn't tell you. But you can tell it's low because the center line of the image is running through the center of the dog, which means the camera couldn't have been meaningfully higher than the center line of the dog. And the verticals are all pretty solidly vertical. So really good instinct there to do that. The dog, however, doesn't fill the frame. So if you were to have the dog in the center of the frame with either that wood chest in the background or the onions hanging in the background, that would have been closer to the intent of the prompt. And then this last one here of the waterfall before we get into the top 5, I really enjoyed this shot. There's a lot of good things going on here. I love the colors. They're very muted, and I think that really works very well. I love the light coming in from behind the waterfall over the mountains and that hard line of sunlight in the waterfall mist. I like the trees up front. The things that I think that I struggled with this image were that the waterfall is a little bit out of focus. So the depth of field is pretty shallow, and the trees are what's in focus. So I don't know if this was handheld or what the setting was. The composition, I think, is really wonderful. If this image had been taken with a really nice deep depth of field, and the waterfall and the trees around the waterfall up at the top especially had been in sharp focus, just like the trees in the foreground, I think this would have been very possibly one of the strongest images in this set. So let's go into the top 5 here now. And we'll start here with I don't know if this is a self-portrait or not. Either way, very good frame filling. And so we're up close to the subject, and there's not a whole lot of space around the subject. So technically, really spot on. Not any significant technical errors in the image. Depth of field is a little bit shallow, but that also does a lot. But what is in focus is what should be in focus. There's no mistakes in terms of what is in focus. So solid image, definitely worth having as an honorable mention in this category. So here's another of the fill the frame entries with a building. And again, a really nice example of a repeating pattern shot. Really good job at controlling the verticals with this shot as well. Very difficult to do from the perspective of the photographer in this shot. I really like the choice of this building because it shows two different shapes. There's the bottom, which is angular, and then the top portion of it, which curves off above the bottom. And so that gives a whole lot of depth to the image and is a really neat way to use a repeating pattern to show a break in that pattern. And then, of course, the way that the light and the shadows work on this image, that the parts of the building that curve up in the top portion, and then the part on the right side that has that sharp line bending away from the photographer, those are cast into shadow, and it gives a whole lot of depth to the image and a lot of visual interest as well. This next shot's also a portrait, and I happen to really like this portrait. I think it's really good. It's very much in line with like 1800s portrait style, and I think that's a really fun portraiture style to play with. Canvas or fabric backdrop, a person who is not smiling or super happy makes it appear like a long photo. This shot, and the clothing style here and the lack of makeup on the model could, or subject we should say, means that this photo could very easily have been taken in 1858 or yesterday. I mean, it had to have been taken in 2020 to comply with the rules of the contest. We know that. But it's really channeling a lot of very good photographic tradition in a very modern way. This shot here leaves a bit of negative space, but there is no question about what the subject is. And the subject fills up a good amount, more than 50% of the frame. So I would argue that the frame is really well filled with the monkey, because there's nothing else there's no other elements. The only other elements in the image are blur. So this is our second place winner in this category, and it is an exceptionally good image. No question about the subject, like I said, and really, really well done photo. And then our winner in this category, which is going to get the photo book, is this shot of a dog behind a frame. And when I saw this photo the first time, I got mad. I closed the window on my computer and walked away. I said, no, that is cheating, because that is a frame within a frame. And then I came back to it a couple weeks later and I said, that is a darn good photo. I was wrong the first time. And so it is a frame within a frame. And that frame that is in the frame completely fills the frame. And then the dog is completely filling, I would argue, 3 of those frames. So it is cheating, and it works. And as I've said before, and I will say again as I'm talking about the photos in this contest, I have no issues with clever photography. And I think that this was a very clever way to approach the prompt and succeeded in doing it very well. So that is our second video of 5, and the next video is going to be freezing time, and we'll look at those tomorrow.